Hello, this is Teemu Arina from Biohacker's Handbook and Biohacker Summit. Welcome to the New Light Technologies webinar. And today I have exciting guests joining me directly from Thailand, from two different projects around light technologies. And by the way, if you have any questions or comments during the stream, you're welcome to do so on the Biohacking Book Instagram chat, or you can do that as well on the Biohacker Summit YouTube channel. So I would love to hear where you're joining in, what kind of light therapy you maybe have had today, maybe sunshine, maybe some red light therapy, maybe, you know, I'm using some blue light glasses right now to increase alertness and maybe produce a little bit more dopamine. Earlier today I was using some of the new Biohacker's day glasses. So these yellow lenses are great for computer use. They're not blocking blue light fully. But we also have another unit as well that we have available at the Biohacker Center store, which is the blue light blockers for evening use. But what I find really exciting about light is it's like full spectrum potential in terms of therapeutic use. So there is a lot of potential when it comes to light. So for example, if we just take something like that I did this morning was using an infrared sauna. And an infrared sauna is far infrared. So that's one of the spectrums that really makes you sweat. Now if we come shorter and we use something like near infrared light, which I have in this device right now, it goes deeper to the tissue and it has several healing properties that are very different from a shorter wavelength of light, which is the red light. So red light is now like 650 nanometers, for example, in this device. And that helps with skin health and a lot of like potential for wound healing. There is a lot of potential for application of light. And when we go to shorter wavelengths, like related to daylight, that of course helps us to keep our circadian rhythm in sync. And in the mornings when I wake up, I often like to use some blue light also to help me wake up. And occasionally, if I want to really drift into a more of a meditative state, that's when I'm using the NeuroVIZR device. So maybe we can just like quickly turn it on and show what it is doing. So let's see if my assistant here, Denny, is able to turn it on. But basically, this device is great for inducing states of consciousness that are really driving you deep into the basic operating system hardware, which is your nervous system, starting with your brain. Okay, so now it starts doing its program here. So there's already one light blinking here, and it goes on like in a full-blown experience. And this one basically comes in front of my eyes, and it connects directly and synchronized with my brain waves, producing interesting states. Definitely, I've used this to really realign myself in terms of work, and you know, I've got a lot of realizations using this device, like even religious experiences might have had with these things. But I have two of the top experts to share us more information about the therapeutic use of red light. So FlexBeam is a great device that I've used. It's available also on the biohackercenter.com online store, and this is basically scanning the near infrared and red light wavelengths. And if I have any back pain or anything like this, maybe on the neck side or something like this, I put this right here and I do my work. And it's great compared to a big red light panel or something like that, which is clumsy to use. This is great if you have any kind of joint issues, like around the wrist, for example, using too much computer, or maybe you got injured while doing some workouts. So that's a great device. We will learn more about this device directly from Christian Barmen, who is joining us in a second. But without further ado, I would love to invite to the show Christian and Garnet, so Garnet Dupuis and Christian Barmen. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, thank you, man.
Maybe Christian
Pleasure
first.
to be here.
How are you doing?
Hey, man. Good evening.
Can't hear you guys now. Eetu, are you connecting the sound? Thank you. Okay.
Can you hear?
Okay, now we can hear you. All right.
Okay, good. Yeah, absolutely. From Thailand, where you all want to be. Here we are, happily. And we've had a full day. It's our evening here, but we are ready, willing, and able. We've been looking forward to this chance. Thank you, man.
Wonderful. All right. How are you doing, Christian?
Yeah, so I'm very good. I'm here in the same studio, actually. I'm just sitting on the other side of the table. And we're in Thailand, in Chiang Mai. It's evening. It's about, I also had a pretty long day. I, like you, probably get up pretty early in the morning to get the sunrise. But I think we can manage to muster up.
Yeah. Come on. Let's rock and roll here. Let's do it. Huh?
Yeah, here on the Northern Hemisphere, the daylight cycle is pretty crazy. Like in summertime, the sun never sets. It's like the light pollution is keeping you awake at night or in the evening. I like to work late, and the light is definitely not helping my circadian rhythm. And when it comes to winter, that's when the sun never rises almost. Like it's kind of comes above the horizon and goes straight back in. I guess you guys have pretty much the same kind of schedule over there in Thailand.
It moves about 60 to 90 minutes. We're a bit above the equator, so it's not 12-12, but it shifts about an hour-ish seasonally, but that's about it. Right now it's around sunset is maybe 7:15-ish, and in our so-called winter, it might be more like 6:15. So we're about an hour off the equator.
Right. So
sunrise right now is 6 in the morning, pretty much.
Yeah.
So you guys don't really need any wake-up lights or heliotherapy devices. Pretty much the sun is up already at 5 a.m. or something like this.
No, we're pretty good. No, I live up in the, Christian lives down here in what I call the flats, and I live up at about 1,000 meters up in the rainforest. So it's a different microclimate. I live in a steep valley with massive trees. So I get the sky lights up before the sun hits my house, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. How about vitamin D levels? I guess you guys don't need to supplement much on that one.
Maybe you, Garnet.
Maybe me, because I'm a forest mountain guy, so I have to maybe get out into the sun more because giant bamboo and trees and all these things. But there's plenty of light. It's beautiful. I've got no complaints.
Yeah. We got people.
Sorry.
Yeah, we got people joining in from India, South Africa, Egypt.
Wow.
We have pretty international crowds. Cyprus. Okay. That's pretty cool. So wherever you're from, please type in the chat where you're joining in. And it's fun to see people from different time zones jumping on the call.
Well, Teemu, it's credit to you and your organization that you've built over these past few years, credibility. And Finland is not common for most people internationally, but you're making it a big talk zone. So thank you. It's because of you that this network is alive right now. So respect on that.
Yeah, we want to keep on. Really facilitating the biohacker community, people interested in health optimization, optimizing their performance and well-being and all of that. And I would say I see a lot of different trends coming into biohacking. And when we started pretty much in 2012, 2013, things like blue light blocking was not a big thing. Red light therapy, definitely not. But in the last few years, I would say the first wave from 2015 onwards was a lot about blue light blocking. It's now kind of everyone knows about that, but red light therapy is another kind of big trend that has caught people's attention in the biohacking community. And of course, everything related to getting your daily dose of sunshine and all of that has always been there. So most of the good stuff is free. Now, I would love to hear about your kind of background. So let's introduce the guys a little bit deeper. Okay, so Christian is from FlexBeam and Garnet is is representing NeuroVIZR, but he's an innovator and like deeply involved also in FlexBeam as well. So, guys, give us a little introduction of who you are and how you kind of became interested in light technology in the first place.
Christian, you go first so I can make up something good by the time it gets to me.
We have to cap you on time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, my name is Christian Supply Chain Barmen, and that's my name in my passport. I'm like a China guy. I guess I'm known as the China guy back home in Europe. I left Norway pretty early when I was, well, I didn't leave, but I was working in Asia from when I was 20 years old. And we had a company with an office in China. So I got to travel there very early on and set up a company there and start doing manufacturing in Asia for Scandinavian and European companies. So my background is basically as a supply chain, purchasing guy, running development companies and supply products all over the world, but primarily a China guy. And I moved to Thailand from China about 9 years ago because of schooling for my kids. And that was pretty much the best choice I've ever made. And now I'm here in Chiang Mai for about 8 years and we started Recharge 3 years ago. So basically the last 3 years have been pretty much work for me. And I met Garnet about 2.5 years ago.
Right. So Recharge is basically the company that produced the FlexBeam device. Now, what got you interested in running a red light therapy device company, and what's your connection to this type of light therapy?
Yeah. So basically pretty much the same time as you said there, 2012, 2013, I was in China and I had some issues with my gallbladder. I had to remove it actually. So I went to surgery in China. So if anybody needs a recommendation, I would recommend not to do that. And from there, I started becoming more health interested. And before that, I was not really, that concerned about health. And then I listened to Dave Asprey by chance on a conspiracy podcast, Gnostic Media. And he was talking about bulletproof coffee and this red light that he puts up his nose. I don't know if you remember those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that was the first time I actually saw red light therapy. And I'm like, what the can I drink coffee with this stuff? So I was pretty into it. I ordered it. We got it to China. And Aryan, who you probably met, our co-founder and inventor of the FlexBeam, back then he was just laughing at me because he said 5 milliwatt of laser would not do much in your brain, Mr. Barmen. So then I kind of let it, I didn't play around with it that much. And then 4 or 5 years later, Aryan actually stumbled over red light therapy when he was trying to fix a problem with his wife. And when I saw that, he was working inside of my company and I saw what he was doing and he started ordering samples and, we're making prototypes. And basically there was 3, I can get back to more of that later, but there was 3 specific incidents that I saw with my own eyes live what red light therapy can do. And then I started a company.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting, like when it comes to light therapy, once you actually get a personal experience about it, then you kind of become a believer that, wow, this really does something. For me, it was when I got some flu symptoms and I used that directly on my mouth, and it just like the sore throat just went away after like 15 minutes of that, and it felt much better for the rest of the day, and I did that the next day, and it helped. And also the same with any kind of injuries or joint pains from exercise or whatever, like once I apply it on those areas, it does much. But definitely if you are sick and you have like some kind of condition, some chronic pain, which I also dealt with, some back pains and so on, then you will see what it's able to do. And it's from science perspective, there is thousands of peer-reviewed articles available on PubMed right now about photobiomodulation, low-level laser therapy, which is, I guess, the laser application that you also tried early on, and red light therapy in general. And one Finnish guy called Vladimir Heiskanen has produced a huge database of all the different research that has come out of red light and near-infrared light, photobiomodulation, technologies in general for different kind of ailments. And it turns out, like clinically, it's used for wound healing, for example, in diabetic patients who have wounds that don't heal. It's used for improving eyesight in people who have different kind of retinal issues or damage or glaucomas and so on. So it helps with those areas. So often light is damaging to eyesight, but an application of red light at the ideal dose in a controlled setting can definitely help with people who have degenerating issues related to eyesight. Now, if you have any kind of thyroid problems or something like that, it can really help with people with thyroid problems by applying directly to the thyroid. And of course, injury recovery. I guess with FlexBeam, you guys are focusing quite a lot on the recovery side for athletes and so on. So that's kind of the main application. If you get if you do a hardcore workout and you got some joint pain or something like this or back pain, it's pretty good. This device for the lower back,
amazing.
It's amazing on a joint. And what I like about this is that it has the battery, so it's not. I don't need to connect it to an AC and outlet, and also the fact that it has these different programs and which are timed, so you get the ideal dose. Because with red light therapy, there is an ideal dose window as well. So having too little exposure does kind of nothing, and having too much of it, you start to reverse some of the benefits of using it. So you don't want to overdo these things on these areas of application. But if we jump quickly into what the mechanisms are, maybe you can, Christian, guide us through what's happening on the application area when you apply near infrared light or red light on a specific tissue. What's going on there?
Okay, so I can speak from my knowledge. I'm a business guy. I'm the CEO of the company, so I'm not a part of the medical side of things. But there are things happening that I believe, and maybe Garnet can speak more to this, that are more things happening than the classic ATP cycle. But that's the first thing that I learned about red light therapy was the famous fourth phase of the phosphorylation, where it goes in and kicks off the NO from the cytochrome C oxidase. That's so
NO is nitric oxide, basically. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the effects that it has, the light travels into your tissue, and it has this wonderful way of freeing up areas or docking stations for oxygen within your cells that are previously occupied by these nitric oxide molecules. This is my understanding once again. And then these nitric oxide molecules go out and circle into your bloodstream, and they have relaxing effects on your endothelial layer in your, the muscles that control the blood veins. Maybe I'm going into too much here, but basically it has a relaxation effect on your blood veins. So you pump more blood and you produce more ATP by adding oxygen and have a more efficient Krebs cycle, basically.
Right. So basically, vasodilation.
Yeah, that's the CEO talking. But I guess we can have. I have an expert.
No.
Was that okay?
Yeah. Do you have, Garnet, anything to add here?
I think you should.
No, I don't think I could add to that. I think that we're still in a discovery mode, and it's very attractive to lock in on some known mechanisms and pump the marketing out of them as much as you can. There's more happening than that. That's certain. It's just that we really don't know how to quantify it yet. Whether there's structuring in the plasma, whether there's biophotonic intercellular communication. These things are all likely. So it doesn't make the other things false. It's just that there's a lot more truth to add. Right. And we're really catching the first and second wave of this. Give us 5 more years and we'll say 5 other things.
Yeah. So one of the mechanisms that has been basically described about what's going on is that in the Krebs cycle, where we produce energy in the mitochondria, the cytochrome C oxidase gets activated and releases ATP. ATP is basically energy, and without ATP, you probably drop dead. So it's the central energy production cellular energy production system that it influences. But now with latest research, they start paying attention to the fact that there are systemic effects. So if I apply this on a major artery, of course, on that area or that site, there is things that the cells directly by being exposed to this light get, but there's some kind of systemic circulatory things going on. But interestingly, red blood cells don't have mitochondria. So the blood itself being exposed to this light, it cannot be explained. The effects can be explained by the cytochrome C oxidase necessarily directly, but maybe related to the NO production. But there is also
I think that's where our company name comes in.
Yeah, well, actually, Nordenstrom, up in your area of the country, I think has the most unifying principle, although he's not given much attention. It's called closed biological circuits, and he proposes that in the same way that a nerve cell propagates electrically along its surface, not in the axonal fluid, that the blood vessels are a conductive medium where you have the easy water structuring against the hydrophilic vessel, and that the vascular system is actually a closed biological circuit. And that because I do the on the wrist blood irradiation every morning for an hour or so because I drive, and the principle there is that the effects are absolutely systemic. The mitochondrial model does not work, and yet there's strong evidence of systemic benefit. I think anybody interested could look up Nordenstrom and closed biological circuits and start to give a lot more systemic understanding. Like I was saying a bit earlier, we latch on to a couple of concepts and then we squeeze them for all they're worth. The mitochondrial nitric oxide thing is valid, but it's obviously not sufficient. So if you want to have fun, check out Nordenstrom and closed biological circuits.
Right. Yeah, there's a question from the chat about if for example, FlexBeam is good to stimulate cardiac repair. Now, it's definitely affecting the cardiovascular system, and there are studies also of strokes, heart failure, recovering from these things, healing. Definitely, it's one of those big applications, but I wouldn't necessarily directly.
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah.
Right now, you can affect more safely indirectly and systemically, but the heart itself, because it has its own electrical propagation system, direct significant stimulation to the heart organ itself can create a lot of excitatory action in the heart vessel, the heart organ. So I think the answer is a positive yes, but going indirectly or systemically, perhaps with the blood system, that would be a wiser choice, knowing that we don't know, but we do know, be careful with the heart directly.
Absolutely, yeah, especially if you use like near infrared light that penetrates much deeper into the tissue. So I have actually, if I add like the only adverse reaction I've got to red light therapy is like applying it directly on the heart area. So that's when I got like a really high heartbeat, and I was like, "What's going on here?" And that was not fun.
I'm laughing because I can say I concur. Being the explorers and experimenters that we are, playing with different wavelengths.
Oh, the 9.
Don't do it directly over your heart at high intensity 2 days in a row. That would be my advice.
Speaking from experience.
Hypothetically.
Okay. Yeah. Christian, you wanted to add something.
Yeah. So, as you probably can hear, Garnet is somewhat of a mentor for me when it comes to the actual physical realm of red therapy. What I'm learning more and more about right now is the effect it has also on the nervous system. So there's the the fancy words, and I like to say these fancy words, but there's also much more going on on the areas that is not tissue, because there are more systems in our body than just the tissues and the muscles and the blood. And maybe Garnet can say a couple of words on that, because that's kind of what interests us right now. Just because the issue we have you mentioned all these positive effects that the red light therapy and FlexBeam can offer. For us in marketing, this is very difficult. We can't say that it's a Swiss Army knife or it can do anything. So that's why we're focusing right now on recovery. And so you go and do a lesson of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for instance, and then you will very quickly understand what I mean. Then you will really see the power of it, right?
Yeah, that's kind
so
of
it can
like
do all these things.
Yeah, it's like in terms of a consumer device, like we're not healing like disease here. We're improving performance and increasing wellness and speeding up recovery for sure. But if anyone is interested in any of the therapeutic uses, like just go to PubMed, search for any condition, and for the biomodulation red light therapy, you will find what's out there. And there's significant findings for many different issues that people are going through. Now, in terms of performance enhancement, I use red light therapy in the morning to increase energy. It's kind of like a cup of coffee for my brain. And when we were speaking about these lasers that you stick into your nose that produce this red light therapy, I jokingly called that previously like laser cocaine, because the kind of effect it has on your brain is like you become quite alert without stimulants, and that's probably because of it expands this vasodilation. It improves nutrient delivery, and a lot of nootropics that people take in supplemental form are actually having this vasodilating property to them, and also blood sugar balancing effect, which is another thing that often helps people to concentrate and focus. But this vasodilation is one of those like mechanisms through which the body is able to deliver more nutrients to microveins and tissues. There is a question about also different other wavelengths of light, and there's this term called chromotherapy, basically like using different colors, and those are also linked to therapeutic uses. Have you guys anything to comment on other wavelengths of light other than red light?
Yeah, the chromotherapy, and probably the most famous originally India, Dincha, and all the trouble he got into with regulatory agencies that ended up shutting him down, but his adult son has carried on his work. We have something good and bad in our science. What's good is it's progressing our understandings in all sorts of quantifiable metrics. If we can find a mechanism, we tend to believe it. Right now, conventional science is beginning to support what we've been talking about, but still doesn't support the idea that different colors of light broadly applied to the body as a whole has any kind of effect at all. And it's like trying to measure sound with a thermometer. You know, if we don't have the machines, we don't have the technology to interface with the phenomena, then we tend to discard the phenomena. So personally, and we'll get into a little bit more some of my background, but I've worked in these domains throughout my life, and they're credible. There's positive subjective experience. The problem in a culture that is now fraught with even questioning what is fact and what is fake, what do you believe, science or not, we have a conflict in terms of a philosophy of science. So what about those things, different colors of light? Absolutely. Of course, you can have the subjective experience. The problem is we don't have a metric-based science to catch up with the experience. So I would say coming soon to a university near you, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay, yeah, now it's on. So I actually did work with Dr. Olli Sovijärvi a little bit on some of these. We've been working on a document on photobiomodulation and different forms of light, also chromotherapy. And if I give like a quick overview of different wavelengths and what they might do, like therapeutically, based on current scientific research, like of course, like people choose different colors for different like interior designs and so on to induce like alertness or calmness, and there's a reason why hospitals are painted in certain colors from the inside. Yeah. But if we start with red light, so that's around 600 to 700 nanometers. It supports tissue healing, joint and muscle health, and has definitely a kind of a pain-reducing effect as well. And it can also improve collagen synthesis. So if you're an athlete, that's definitely one thing. If you are into beauty, longevity, anti-aging, that's another thing. Near-infrared light, 700 to 1,300 nanometers, generally the same as red light, but goes deeper into the tissue, therefore being more helpful in joint, muscle, and pain therapies, organs, and so on. If we move on to blue light, so that's 450 to 495 nanometers. That has been used for acne and sun damage. Acne specifically because it's antimicrobial, so it kills microbes. That's one of the reasons why if you have sunlight, you should let that into your house, into where you live, because it has this antimicrobial effect as well. Now green light, that has only kind of early research still. That's 500 to 580 nanometers. It can support calmness, reduce migraines, may reduce pain in fibromyalgia, may improve wound healing in a rat study, stimulates proliferation and migration of endothelial cells in vitro. Then if we go into the wavelengths of light that are producing vitamin D, there is also vitamin D lamps on the market that provide this type of heliotherapy, where in a couple of minutes you produce thousands, tens of thousands of international units of vitamin D. And this heliotherapy can also support circadian rhythms as well as vitamin D production. It has been used therapeutically for sleep disorders and skin conditions also. And then we can go into bright light therapy also, which is for seasonally affective disorder or SAD and seasonal depression. That supports your circadian rhythm as well. That's where morning sunlight exposure is kind of key. And the most important thing about this bright light therapy is then to have high enough strength in the lumens. So more than 10,000 lux, so higher brightness, that will produce best results. Now, different type of light have been used for centuries in many different cultures, from ancient Egypt to Greece to China to India. Egyptians, for example, they utilize sunlight as a therapy as well as utilizing different colors for healing. And many cultures before us have definitely discovered the benefits of using different wavelengths of light for inducing mood and healing and alertness and performance. So so
Teemu, can I give you my favorite blue light therapy story? Okay, it's a little bit historic. England, a lot of orphans, babies, and very large orphanages, which were usually quite difficult for the babies to survive. And there was one that had many wards, and for some reason, one ward had more babies surviving than the other wards. And it's a longer story, but the shortcut leads us all the way to Billy blankets and Billy chambers. It turned out that that ward happened to have stained glass and had blue stained glass, and the blue light in the mornings would come shining down on these babies, which led to a startling realization that a lot of babies, of course, are born prematurely, the liver's not fully functioning, and you have this bilirubin problem. So they're called Billy blankets. And to this day, babies born with that condition are put into a blue light box or are covered with a kind of a soft blanket that has the blue LEDs, and the blue light rapidly matures the bilirubin function in the body, and the babies survive. So it happened to be a stained glass window, blue light.
Wow! Yeah. Wow! That's quite a story. So often these are of course like discovered by accident. Christian,
you should ask since you have Garnet on the call here. You know, wavelengths, that's one thing, and the power you put behind the wavelengths, that's one thing. Yeah. But there's more to light. There's more to light. There's the power, and there's also information. Yeah. So how can such a low power light source even do anything, Garnet?
Well, okay, those are two overlapping topics. You know, power power. No, you don't want to try to drink out of a fire hose. So one thing is the power conversation, which maybe we'll get to or not. The other is the information aspect. And we tend to think a lot, almost as though the body is a passive object. So we talk about the wavelength, how anatomically deep it could go, what kind of mechanism can be triggered. And we don't seem oftentimes to recognize that the body is a living organism, that it needs not only energy, but it needs how to craft the energy, the information aspect. So when we start to get into crafting not only the issue of wavelength and power, but also pulse rates, flicker rates, the kind of conversation that the body has with informational dynamics, I think then the therapy can start to become increasingly more elegant. With the FlexBeam, I was happily involved with crafting the signal sets along with Aryan, the engineer. And one of the things that we brought into it is a sunrise, plateau, sunset. We also have variable neurologically sensitive, flicker or information rates built into it. And I think that certainly the energetics of light therapy are increasingly popular and full of potential. I think that we're right around the corner in appreciating that the energy also can act as an information delivery medium. And in that case, the power can be extremely low by our technical standards, totally sufficient by biological standards. And it's like right now we're using energy, but we're loading the energy with information, a kind of a cybernetic theory appreciation of using energy to communicate information. And I think there's a lot of discovery that's waiting for us on the information side of energy.
Absolutely, yeah. What I really like about FlexBeam is that it actually is scanning also these different wavelengths of light. So there's all these studies that show certain nanometers of light having slightly different effects, and some of them are more effective than others. And basically, you are scanning. You're not just like statistically or statically like 650 nanometers, but it's like scanning these different wavelengths, and there's this flickering effect. I assume that's related to transmitting some information. Now, Vielight, which is a US-based company that produces these low-level laser therapy devices, these intranasal lasers, they also have different frequencies at which the light is flickering, and they noticed in studies published in, I think, in Nature magazine that it also has an effect on the brain in terms of synchronizing brain waves and wavelengths of there. So in a similar manner, as you use like binaural beats, use sound, the difference between the frequencies of sound to induce the brain to synchronize to that, to, for example, increase, let's say, more brain waves related to a meditative state. In a similar manner, you can actually induce that through light. So is that what you're saying, like that when you're changing the frequency of the light, you are able to induce the organism to synchronize with the source?
Teemu. Now your cow has wandered into my pasture.
All right, I'm ready. I'm ready for the next 1 hour lecture on this.
Yeah, this sounds complex.
It's like, ooh. All right. Background. Even my best friends don't typically know how to describe what I do, which is perfect. I think a title that is reasonable is an integrative complementary healthcare expert, which means just about anything that you want. I'm older than just about everybody that I know. So for me, this biohacker thing, it's like the sequel to the movie, in a sense, because I was deeply involved in the human potential movement. I mean, if it makes any sense, I just turned, next week I turned 72. So I began my work with light therapy 50 years ago, which is like preposterous to even think about. university. You know, I hit the university at the perfect time. You know, it was when two remarkable pills came into culture. One was LSD and the other was the birth control pill. Like, what could be better, right? And I was okay, you have to know that the most important thing to me of all is consciousness, and how light can relate to it is it's a giant topic. But I at that time, I bought the first strobe lights and black lights and these ancient machines, you know, that you could find in old hardware stores and everything. And of course, everybody, any dorm room or, you know, house party always was happy or scared when I showed up, because I'd say, okay, now that we're all, you know, tripping balls or high or whatever it is, let's see what this strobe light will do. Let's see what these lights would do. And the passion has never gone away. To this day, now with the NeuroVIZR and FlexBeam and all, I see that technology is finally catching up to this urge, this appetite, this appreciation that this stuff works. And I have a rule in house here that nobody can say the word binaural beat to me. So, because
why not?
Why not? Well, because okay, it's an old story, and it's a good story, but it's an old story. And you know, I'll say we, because there was an early community, not just me, but you know, we were working with early brain entrainment and biofeedback in the early mid-'80s, 1980s. That's like last century, by the way, in case you weren't born then. And you know, there was a lot of discovery at that time, the frequency following response, biofeedback principles. And we'll skip the 3-hour lecture, but that since that time, there's been a momentous series of discoveries about brain and consciousness, that brain entrainment in and of itself, and I'm not like, you know, pissing on anybody's parade here about brain entrainment. It is what it is. It does what it does. Not as much as you would want it to is the discovery, but here we are. Now we've got neuroplasticity, which nobody even talked about. The fact that the brain, even in adulthood, is changeable. Now we've got realistic, exciting, psychedelic research that we didn't have before. Now we've got the maturation in complex adaptive systems and signaling theory and systems theory, using these things, along with the fact that now, if you can see, we've got all this personal technology that, believe me, 40, 45 years ago, nobody could even imagine. There is an opportunity now to explode past old news into something that is unique to our generation. And that's what excites me the most. That is the most exciting thing, that we're at a pivot point. We're at a right of a crest of a wave. And, you know, it's got to pop. I was talking earlier to Dio, our friend in tech here, that it's like the electric guitar wasn't there and then it was there. And then this guy named Jimi Hendrix played it like nobody ever played it before. And now, 30 years, 40 years later, even 12-year-old kids can play like Hendrix, but nobody could before. This is what charges me up the most, is taking where we've been to where we are and to where we're going. I'm much more interested in today for tomorrow. And yeah, we can take advantage of the things that we have known. I'm a guy to push the envelope at this point. And
right.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about that we probably won't get through today.
Yeah.
And the NeuroVIZR is one of the vehicles for that.
Yeah.
I'm into, you know, I've reframed it as brain engagement to try to differentiate it conceptually from brain entrainment, brain engagement. To me, it's current. Yeah, blast off. That's what I say.
There is Kish in the chat saying basically that getting enlightened. I love that.
Yeah.
Enlightened. Yeah. That's you were talking about the enlightenment from the 60s and 70s and onwards. Actually, it was in the 60s when they discovered that they discovered laser lights. The invention of laser lights in
Yep.
the 1960s made it possible to centralize single wavelength of light and use it for therapeutic applications. So basically,
All
that
true.
was the beginning of therapeutic use. So this is very new science in many ways. Now,
Yeah.
if anyone,
That's okay.
yeah, I mean, if anyone in the audience wants to ask any questions from Garnet, me, Christian, please go ahead. We're happy to answer any questions. There's a question about therapy for brain tissue regeneration. So
Sure.
you talk about neuroplasticity. That's one of the mechanisms through which the body is able to repurpose also certain areas of the brain for other uses, but also connectivity is another one. Like if you increase density on certain areas of the brain, you improve connectivity. And I know that from some of the papers that I read, that Einstein had a highly connected corpus callosum. Basically, the connectivity between the left and the right hemisphere was much more in tune in his case, and it came from actually learning violin, not guitar, but violin. And this kind of micro movement and using your nervous system in a very attentive and sensitive and time sensitive manner, coordination is one way to improve connectivity on some areas of the brain. But you have also developed technology to induce these type of changes. So this is the NeuroVIZR, and I will put a link on this in the chat. I actually
Eyes
put
closed,
this on.
eyes
Yeah.
closed, eyes closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, going like this. I have my eyes closed now, and what I see is geometric patterns. There is a kind of flickering light, but what is happening in my brain now, I see different like waveforms forming sacred geometry, I would also say. My vision is also kind of expanding to infinity from the left, right, up and down. Okay, now something changed. Okay, now there's like more like pillars raising and twisting like DNA structures. What I see right now, like I see the double. Okay.
Sounds
now,
about right.
Are you sober?
now I don't. Now I'm no longer even actually in the state of flickering light, but I'm actually like seeing memories of different places. I kind of see behind the visuals that are going on right now. So it's definitely activating some memories. So yeah, and I actually started feeling much calmer. I was a bit agitated from the coffee and this chat and all that, and I just want to take a deep breath actually right now. Yeah. So that's that is NeuroVIZR very quickly. Oh wow, it's like a teleportation into
Something
another
else,
realm.
That's your like interdimensional jump back to hello.
Yeah. So I guess what you're doing here is not random blinking, like.
Oh no.
LEDs.
So it's
this has some purpose, like, and it's your expertise. You've been working on this for tens of years. So
yeah.
please share.
Okay. The brain is hungry not just for energy. The brain is hungry for information. The brain is hungry for experience. You know, the consciousness is the number. I don't know you want brain, mind. Let's forget about that whole conversation. But there is a language. The language is both mechanical vibration, electromagnetic radiation. It's light and sound, and we know the brain. We know this language. We know how to do it with sound. That's what we call music. We know what to do. We've been, ever since we shouted out and pounded on a log, and then all the instrumentations up to this point, wind, strings, now electronics, you know, the brain, you want to know what the brain likes, how the brain likes to communicate, music is the best example. Absolutely. We love making it. We love experiencing it. You don't have to think to enjoy it, and yet you know what it's saying. And it seems to be endless. What have we had in the past that allows us to express this same appetite in light. Sunlight, moonlight, firelight, that was about it. Now, and skipping all of the intermediates, now we have new digitized elements and technology that allow us to begin to approximate the language that we express naturally in sound as music in light. Now we have that chance. In the same way that you can bang on a piano and make a bunch of noise, that's not music. You can flash lights a bunch of ways, that's not the light choreography, that's not the sacred geometry, it's not that. But there is a way of crafting it, and that's what we've begun to do. And the crafting, like to make the script for a movie, you just can't put a bunch of characters together and say anything and that it's going to make an engaging movie. There are elements, there's drama, there's conflict, there's reinforcement, you know, there's surprise. This thing that we call humor is based on, where the pattern that you expect doesn't happen. Right now, there is an opportunity that we have to engage the brain with light that is multidimensionally more rich and endless, like music. And you put those two things together and we have a whole new opportunity. I've spent my life, I did all the psychedelic, everything, I've done thousands of hours of this light stimulation as I've crafted it. And I spent my life doing very serious spiritual yogic practices, which I still do. We don't have a lot of time. Our life is very fast paced. People can't devote, 6 months of the year to their practice or 4 hours a day to their practice. We're at a pivotal point. And I think all kinds of things are coming together. Every one of these VIZR experiences are crafted towards a certain purpose. They have a goal, they have a vector. I'm reasonably well educated in psychedelic information theory. I've done, more than my share of psychedelics. There's an opportunity there in a principle of destabilization, order, and chaos. And that's where this is going. Brain entrainment, frankly, I mean, it's very nice. I'm kind of bored with it. What it does, I'm well aware. It doesn't do as much as I want or most people want. It holds promise. Sorry, guys, but I think that's the truth. The issue of neuroplasticity, what psychedelics teach us is that, brain entrainment is pretty simple. It's a frequency following response. It coaxes the brain down into a narrow corridor and will hold it there for a period of time without any kind of attention. You can tap your foot to music and you don't have to be attentive to that. It just follows. That's interesting. But all of the efforts in neuroplasticity, even medically, are not using brain entrainment because it doesn't have an effect there. There's something about engaging the brain, about opening and expanding, as you say, making more and more and more functional connectivities that is what we need to do right now. And it's very good to use. I use like sub-elements of brain entrainment here and there in a composition because it's functional for a certain purpose. But the purpose I'm seeking, which is expanded, clarified consciousness.
So maybe I can just interject very shortly here in case somebody hasn't actually tried the NeuroVIZR.
Okay.
So you have developed these different compositions. They're about 10 minutes long.
That's right.
This has to do with attention span, and it also has to do with sort of the time it takes to coax the brain into the sort of vector that you're looking for.
That's correct. 10 minutes.
Yeah, so that's roughly the
11 minutes to be precise, but
yeah.
I think it would also be good to mention that the light is synchronized with sound. So you have designed specific audio journeys, for example, the Mandala Mind that is connected with a program in the light. So
yes.
Can you talk about this sound and light synchronization and how much more powerful that is in terms of what's going on?
I'd love to. Teemu, I live for this shit. It's okay.
Let's go.
Pardon me for swearing. I mentioned this thing called first language. Everything on Earth grew up together, same atmosphere, same water, same minerals, same thing. So that with proximity, there must be interaction. With interaction, there must be some kind of interrelationship. that meant there had to be communication from the very first time. That's why I call it first language. Mechanical vibration and electromagnetic radiation, sound and light. They love each other. They grew up together, and they create a wholeness in communication. So in these compositions, there is sound crafting, including mood framing, that sets this. I'll use an analogy. It's the one I always use. Imagine a 4-piece rock band. You've got a drummer and a bass player, and they kind of hold everything together. You don't realize how important they are until they stop playing. You've got the drummer and the bass player. Then you've got the lead guitarist and the vocalist. The lead guitarist and the vocalist have a lot of liberty to move in all kinds of places. If you were a music producer, well, if you're a producer, you'd know. But if you were naive and you listen to just the drum track, then you listen to the vocalist, you may not realize they're even involved in the same song. So I use the sound elements like a drummer and a bass player to create a context, to hold things together, to create roots and reference. And then I use the light like a lead guitarist and a vocalist to create liberal exploration and relationships and interdimensionality. So the light is not trying to do what the sound does, and the sound isn't trying to do what the light does. In the same way, the drummer is not trying to do what the vocalist does. So there is a crafting in this, and it's the topic will expand because we will expand this process. I'm forming a company with my dear friend Christian and business associate that we're crafting this thing in the manner that we want to create a group learning phenomena. You know, I don't want it to just be in this piece of bone here. There are lots of other people that are far more talented than me, given the insight and the crafting. We want to expand this. So brilliant sound people, and we'll craft some brilliant light people and put it together. I'm thrilled at the potential that we have now. We've got the minds, we've got the times, we've got the technology. We just need to get together. I don't know. That's kind of like a pitch, but it's my feeling. It's my feeling. Yeah. There's so much. I mean, imagine the early discoveries, like the harpsichord became the piano, became the keyboard of a synthesizer. You know, nobody realized that the harpsichord could become any instrument in the orchestra. Nobody knew that. You know, nobody knew that you could do abstract expressionism before Kandinsky said, painting objects gets in the way.
So what we had to do,
Yeah.
so in Recharge, we, established a strategic partnership with Garnet and the NeuroVIZR quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
So what we did, we basically built a software package, a unique from scratch with another Finnish genius, actually, that is affiliated with Recharge. And we built this composer package for Garnet, which he is refining and making better and better. And he's adding more complexity. And there are so many layers of manipulation that he can do in the light show or light experience, and it's getting better and better. Even you probably Monument and these old ones that you probably tried, Teemu, in the beginning, they are also getting more and more refined with more layers of abstraction.
Okay, let's do a leak here. Let's do a leak. We're working right now on 3 different vectors with the NeuroVIZR. And these are highly specialized, uniquely crafted experiences. One we call the Ganja Collection. And what we've done is we've isolated 10 unique strains of cannabis, of weed, and the kind of experiences that they engender, and crafting sound, light experiences that convey the same kind of personality as that strain of weed. So you can either use it with the weed if you happen to be in a country where it's legal or not, or just use it if you want that feeling. So one is the Ganja Collection. The other, and I'm almost finished, probably a maximum document, I'll send it to you, Teemu, on microdosing and the NeuroVIZR experience. Using the same principled neurological dynamics in full dose and microdose psychedelics, and interpreting that into a crafting of light and sound that can either synergistically increase the microdose experience. Or if you don't want to use substance or you don't have access to substance, you can use the light dose process. I'm building on the Fadiman protocol and the Stamets stacking protocol, all of that. So that's the second one. The first is ganja collection. The second is the microdosing collection. And the third one is the expanded female orgasm, using light and sound to access the neurological hormonal triggers that would allow a woman to increasingly expand her orgasmic experience. So our company, Lucid Tunes, is more than willing to go to where no company has gone before. So these things will slingshot off of the current consciousness collection, which is kind of a broad spectrum of potential experiences that you can be used for crafting. Antti, one of your friends up in Finland, characterized this as a new form of art. And I was really charmed by that. So I call it neuro art. We say that you can think of it as like creative entertainment or consciousness exploration or sensory enrichment. We don't need to find brand new terms, but sometimes they're almost demanded. So this is a little, well, not more than little, quite a large hint, I guess, as to what we're working on right now. And we need inventive, creative, dedicated, super cool people that want to contribute. We're even thinking about doing some open sourcing so that
That's right.
we can create a community out of this thing.
So if I can jump in quickly. So
sorry, man.
So that brings up a lot of like comments and ideas, and specifically when Terence McKenna back in the good old times, like 80s. Spoke about.
Hey, listen! I was a young man in those days. We're not talking about cavemen here.
Yeah, but he's gone. Like many young people don't know, but many know his quotes. But one thing that he did when he saw the computer, he saw that this can be used to transmit and communicate and show people what a psychedelic experience can be. So basically he was talking about virtual reality and all that, like how we can with computers we can recreate and communicate like what kind of states we have been in on those trips. And now your friend and my friend Antti is talking about this as a form of art. You are kind of creating it. And when I spoke about the different landscapes that I see when I put this device on, this is exactly like a digital psychedelic. So I'm not using a substance to induce this experience, but it's like digital DMT. It basically produces a psychedelic effect. I don't think I need to microdose even to get a significant like trip out of this. And the funny thing is that this stuff is legal, I can access I can access a psychedelic state with this legal digital DMT that I have on the table right now. So
Christian is
I want to say something and sort of maybe also force a little answer. So I have been using the NeuroVIZR for now almost 3 years, I guess, almost every day.
Yeah,
I'm probably the one in the world that has used it the most, except for Garnet.
Yeah, true.
And what started happening to me in the last, I'm not sure if it was something he did with the machine or if it's just me getting better at it.
Combination.
Okay, but this is like, I get goosebumps just talking about it, because after you do it for a while and you manage to, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but if you think about it, you can't do it. And you have to be like in total awareness. I don't know how to explain that, but you cannot analyze it. So you sit there and you just have to melt away. And I will go into, this doesn't happen every time, but it only happens on the mandala bind and those deeper, the 3 layer in the consciousness. I will go into a physical surge of energy from starting low in my legs and then up my spine. And it's almost like when you do the front roll on the bed when you're a kid kind of thing, and you get that whoop, and then boop, something happens. And I go from seeing the lights in front of me till being inside it. And it's like it's a physical thing, and I used to call it pop or breakthrough, but you called it first moment.
First moment, yeah.
Have you experienced this, Teemu?
Absolutely, yeah. And in a similar manner to psychedelic experience, like the visuals that you see in the beginning are kind of a distraction. If you go behind the visual, if you like really go behind what you see in front of your eyes into like some kind of meta layer of consciousness in that, like it's just like don't pay attention to what is going on in front of you, but you kind of go behind that. That's where you kind of access some deep knowledge and visions as well. I call it kind of a visionary state. That you. It's interesting that when we talk about visions, it's kind of a pictorial. It's something like when you close your eyes and you are in a sensory deprivation, let's say tank, your brain starts to generate light out of nothing. It just wants to see something. It tries to make sense out of the nothingness, and that's when your brain starts to vividly produce visions. So there's something to this, what is going on in terms of like the visual side of things, which is like multidimensional.
I'm chewing my tongue. This, I don't think it's like a psychedelic. I think it is a psychedelic. And what do I mean by that? That there are agents and there are endpoint actions. My own analogy is if you order something online, you don't care whether it's UPS or FedEx or DHL that brings it to the door. That's just the agent delivering your package. So there are different agents that are entirely capable of producing the similar or same actions. I think it's easy, and I think it's reasonably true, supported by as much research as we have, that you can characterize fundamentally psychedelics are neurodestabilizers. That's what they do. And there's a lot that we can say about it, me and other people. And this microdosing article will probably flesh this out a lot more. But that the brain exists in an ordered state, and to go to another higher ordered state, it has to go through a transitional period of chaos. The destabilizing element is what psychedelics do so well. We have ways now with light sound to also produce what I call tempered instability, that we can not only destabilize, but we can destabilize it by very discrete degrees of time and amount, which you can't do with a full psychedelic unless you just modify dose. That's why microdosing or mesodose or full dose or heroic, we can be a lot more determined that, but the principle, that destabilization process is the trick. The visual cortex, hey, it's not difficult, I can tell you that we know this from psychedelics, and I do it with the choreography of the light mixed with the sound, is that what you do is you suppress alpha in the visual cortex, because alpha keeps shit together in the visual cortex so that when we look around, we can make sense of what's going on. With alpha suppression, and then you kick in a destabilizer at the same time, the visual cortex says, wow, this, it's like taking a girdle off. I don't know what that feels like, but like taking tight pants off, and the visual cortex starts to modify and express and play. And then when you feed it certain frequencies, which is the vocabulary, the visual cortex gives you a whole new set of grammar, and kaboom, it happens. At that same time, in that destabilization, the famous default mode network, the thing that makes me feel like me, is disrupted. So the me feeling starts to go away. That's the breakthrough that Christian talks about, where there isn't me having an experience, I just am. That's when the default mode network. So we can do this. I mean, this is known, and how to do it, and how to do it better, and better. Second point, the visions. The first stage, the very first stage are called phosphenics, little like twinkly things, which is easy. You can just press on your eye, you get phosphenes. Then it starts to get more developed with the colors and the sacred geometry stuff. That's called the entopic stage. That's when you destabilize the visual cortex and the hypercolumns and all this fancy stuff. It's predictable. You can do it reliably. The third stage, if you hang in and you know how to relax into it, you go into what's called the eidetic. And that's when you start to see stuff. you start to see landscapes and beings and places and things. And some of us do this quite naturally because the mechanisms are there. We have these innate mechanisms, whether it's dark cave, dark retreats, or whether it's terrible disease or high levels of stress or vision quests or yogic techniques or psychedelics or certain provocative technologies. It's the same damn brain. It's the same damn brain. So I think we're at a stage where the concept is shifting and changing, that we can become more interested in the endpoint actions and how to benefit from them, how to extract usable information instead of just going to the circus, which is what a psychedelic experience can be like. Is there something in this exploration that I can bring back to my life, integrate at a higher order? Consciousness.
Wonderfully put. Yeah, there is a mindful leader is saying, yes, I think the destabilizing brings down the mind operating system for a brief moment, allowing awareness to shine through unfiltered, basically assisted through technology.
Boom. Aldous Huxley, way back when, he said, using the analogy at the time, he said that he thought that the brain had a series of valves, and that the valves are basically step-down valves, and that when you open the valves, listen, we're looking at images. I'm looking at Christian and Dio and the camera and the whole thing. I don't look like this, right? I appear like this, maybe, but my appearance is a filtered construct.
Correct. Yeah. So basically, I'm not seeing you directly. I see a filtered construct, a representation.
That's right.
In my visual cortex.
Maybe I'm actually, what we think from our science is I'm a cloud of probability fuzzy atomic energies. You could probably see through me or something if you're having like neutron vision or something. So the
neutron vision.
We've crafted.
It looks like Teemu might have that.
I have neutron vision.
You do.
I'm a Marvel character, some super villain.
Anyway, we call it Neuro Reality, to try to create some kind, you need terminology. It took me a long while to end up with first language. And now this thing called first moment, it's the goal, whether Tolle calls it power of now or presence or whatever. First moment is when the experience is itself for what it is. The second moment is when you react to what it is. And the third moment is when you respond to your reaction of what it is. And we all are hungry for first moment. We're all hungry for the immediacy of simply being alive and what that is like. And it is the biggest medicine. It's the greatest gift. It's the highest goal. It's the most fun.
So one thing that comes out from the studies of Richard Strassman on the spirit molecule, DMT, basically, is that and in some of his writings and his colleagues' writings and so on, is that people have, under the influence of DMT, which is produced also in our bodies, theoretically understood to happen at a near-death experience, and in a religious experience where people get teleported somewhere where they describe seeing angels or the God or aliens, alien contact, whatever it is. And what I find really fascinating is some of the observations that basically are talking about the fact that as humans we need to apply symbols to what we see and experience. Religions and different entities and deities are kind of symbols through which we explain the divine. An extraterrestrial contact with aliens is kind of a symbol that we assign to what we think we see. If you have no previous experience of Jesus, you might not see Jesus. You might see some kind of jungle animal or flying bird or something like this. But if you have been grown up as a Christian, then you might see Jesus. So the associations that we get from our vision quests are often culturally intertwined. What is very interesting about the Amazonian shamanism and so on is, of course, the different tribes, they see the animals. They see jaguars, they see snakes. Those are familiar to them. When conquistadors came in on their horses, in their metal armors and with their flying airplanes, whatever, that after that they start seeing those in their visions. They start seeing, you know, these armored gods coming in.
Teemu, I'm going to promise you another paper. I don't have enough time, but I've been drafting a paper that corresponds McKenna and his principles with James Kent and psychedelic information theory, and Jeremy Narby, cosmic serpent and DNA identification. I see them all coming together, and much of what you've just said, I think is spot on. It's spot on, and you know, maybe I won't sleep for the next couple of weeks and finish up all this stuff. But yeah, this is where we're at. We're, you know, like DMT, you know, Christian knows I talk about what I call the wheat germ effect. To me, it's the molecule du jour, you know, it's the thing that we're all excited about, like with red light therapy, mitochondria, because we got to think about something. You know, we have to symbolize our excitement with some kind of reasonable mechanism or some kind of concept. They go, yeah, that sounds about right. And of course we have DMT. We've probably got like 1,900 other similar substances going on. So it's okay. You know, we have to work with ideas, and it's cool, but we shouldn't be limited by the ideas. You know, like let's not squeeze them to death. You know, stay creative. I'm all for it.
So some people talk about like God consciousness, and that we are kind of all from the same source, and seeing all religions, like when we describe like religious experience, it's all describing the same from slightly different angles and different interpretations and cultural backgrounds and whatever. So basically, what we have here is a device for divination that enables us to access those realms on a businessman's 15-minute coffee break. So I put this thing on. In 15 minutes, I'm transported to be hanging around with Krishna, and I come back to the meeting knowing exactly why I'm here. So can you describe about people's experience with these things? Like, I mean, you have had quite a lot of experience with human guinea pigs. What kind of things do you see? Like, what people get out from immersing themselves in this type of light therapy? Christian told about his experience. What other stories can you share about people who gone deep into these realms?
Well, they vary.
Our artist, our musician.
Yeah.
Names.
We have a guy that everybody's going to get to know a whole lot more. Jason Saxton and Jay Sachs, and he's a very wonderful musician, and he had his first experience, I don't know, it was 2-3 weeks ago or something, and he's super cool. You'd think that he's like a total, you know, like, but he, you know, he's very conservative actually at the same time, and he had his first experience, and he took off the headset and he was crying. He was crying, and I can't speak for him, but a rough paraphrasing is that what did he say? That I feel like now I know what I'm doing with my life. I've been searching. Now I know what it is, and so he's full on into wanting to learn how to, because he's into the sound music. He's very talented, and now he sees what because he said for weeks before even coming and meeting us, he would go to the bathroom and press his palms against his eyes just to see for brief flashing moments, you know, something. And you know, this whole thing, you know, destiny or all of it, you don't really know. But anyway, the experiences vary, because I've had earlier models and crafting things, and you know, some people have an appetite for the sacred, and some people, maybe they don't call it the sacred, but other people don't so much. So people are going to use it. I mean, if it's just stress reduction or something, or just, you know, I just need to check out, and you know, instead of like, you know, having like, you know, 6 tequilas or going out and punching somebody or whatever somebody does to stop the pain. Some people will use it for that, just to turn off the shit for a while. And if that's what works for them, I love it. So I think that in the same way that, okay, I'll use the analogy, which is reasonable but not perfect, the way that people use psychedelics, right? I haven't for some long while, but I used to do a lot. And for me, it was always sacred. I was never a party guy. It's never been my thing. And so it was all, you know, the setting, that whole kind of thing. For other people, it's a different thing. It cracks their head open and they see something and it gives them relief. I think the experiences can be as varied as humans are varied.
I found it interesting. Of course, everybody in Recharge have tried it, and several of us use it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But for, you know, we're a big company now, and many people have never tried psychedelics.
That's right.
And that's kind of the most fun.
Yeah.
They lack words, so they finish the session, and we take it off, and like, how was it? It was, I don't know.
Yeah.
What to call it? They can't put the word on it because
that's right.
The experience is so profound and so different from anything they have tried before.
Makes me think of William James, right? One of the 4 descriptors of a credible mystical experience is it's ineffable. You can't find the words. You know, one of the characterizations we have for the experience is that it's a way of knowing without thinking. That it's not a matter of intelligence, it's not a matter of concept. Maybe you can talk about it, but you don't have to have ideas to get it. You don't have to have ideas to get it. So first language, brain engagement, neuro reality, knowing without thinking, first moment. You know, we're trying to find words that are reminiscent of previous terms that might be psychedelic terms, or might be yogic terms, or might be, who knows, pathological terms, and trying to shape them in a way that they're true and yet still unique to our time and our culture right now. Yeah.
For me, it's my experience with these and some other visual kind of stimulatory experience, including, like, for example, the use of sacred geometry and patterns that are evolving through biofeedback, for example.
Sakari's work,
omnigeometry, is and with this light also, the frequencies and all of that in specific patterns, tapping into the neural programming, sending the bits, zeros and ones, telling my brain things and information basically. And what comes out from using these things is that it brings coherence, it brings structure into an unstructured, chaotic world. So often when we talk about disease, it is basically an imbalance. It is when the thing is not in equilibrium, when it's not in coherence, when it's not in structure. If you look at the person who is sick, you see there is kind of something is malformed, like their face almost is like goes like, you can see it in their impressions, like something is going on. Or you look at an organ, it doesn't reflect the fractalic, beautiful, natural principles that create the organ, but it's like there is something going on, like a black hole almost, like taking it over. And basically the healing process is to reintroduce structure, to reintroduce coherence. And psychologically, it's the same. When you have like a difficult time in your life and you're looping things and you get into dark places and you work with your shadow and whatever that is, it is often like the whole neurological system is out of balance. And what these technologies enable me to do is to bring it into a coherent balance, reintroduce the structure in it. Yeah. And this is probably why in sacred places, like in churches, like in, any tradition, Christian, Catholic, Islam, whatever, the sacred places always reflect the structure, like in terms of architecture, in terms of geometry and patterns that are portrayed that connect you back to the structure of the divine. And this is fascinating. Now, Am I kind of getting into the right stuff here that you've been like?
No, come on, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's like you're my perfect blind date or something, or whatever. About Sakari, and I know him. We've worked together. Hope to work together more in the future. The principle is called bidirectionality. Bidirectionality is when there's a primary experience that is then expressed outwardly. And then when you experience it outwardly, it will tease alive or reinforce or awaken what's inside. So when you have eyes open, sacred geometry, that's an example of bidirectionality. The primary is we could say within us. I don't believe in inside outside, but we'll skip that. The geometry that you see coming out of your head when you have this experience, whether it's psychedelics or this other psychedelic called the NeuroVIZR, because it's not a substance. Then we try to make it outside. So that means, I practice in a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, kind of a subset called Dzogchen. And the mandala, the idea is that if you look at it with your eyes open, it conjures something. It's like looking at a photo of somebody that you love. That's not them, but it reminds you of them, and you have the experience of them. You'd rather be with them. But if you're not with them, at least a photo will stimulate that understanding, that connection, that experience. It's called bidirectionality. So, our nervous system, our sensory system has developed so that we can feed back into us what is on the outside, but actually is a reflection of what's inside. That's why I don't believe in inside outside. I think it's a stupid concept. Give it up. So that's bidirectionality. And the other thing about the structure, the thing about order in consciousness, and order in this case in the nervous system, the brain, is that think of order as a habit. And if you want to change the habit, you can't change it easily because it's like glued in place. Any kind of order wants to stay ordered. Any kind of habit wants to reinforce itself. So in order to go into the temple and have it actually impact you at a level of change, there has to be some kind of destabilizing experience that softens the glue of your old malformed habit, so that this bidirectional information coming from the architecture can create coherence. That's why it can be so frustrating when you can be right there looking at a gorgeous sunset and for some reason it doesn't move you. That's because you're stuck in a level of order. Something has to happen. Something terrible might happen. Your husband dies, or you lose all your money, and there all of a sudden you look and it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, and it's the same damn sunset. That's because of the destabilization, right? So that's why we can't be afraid of stressors. We can't be afraid of challenges. How many people do you know directly or you've heard about where they have a horrible, horrible experience, a terrible illness, and they survive? And you say, I'm so sorry. And they say, don't say sorry. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm a changed person.
This is so true.
Why?
This is so true. Like,
I get
in
excited.
terms of
Sorry.
like to induce positive change, often you have to go in a really dark place. And when it comes to a psychedelic experience, if it's like lovely, beautiful, just amplifying what there is, no much learning comes out of it. But if it's the hardest thing ever, the integration process will open up something new. That opens up the door for neuroplasticity to happen. The same if you lose a friend, a family member, you go through a disease, you lose your job, your money, whatever, your house, like everything you are on. Like I remember actually one friend from Thailand, like back in the day when the tsunami hit, in that time he lost his property. He was diagnosed cancer, so he lost his health, and then he also lost his wife, the wife leaving him. And I spoke with him. I said, you must be going through really terrible times. And he said that the positive thing about this state is that there is only one way, and it is up. When you are, in a coherent peak experience in your life, like you have everything, there is only one way, and it's down. And that is so true. Like you can't see light without darkness. One of my favorite sayings also is that the stronger the light, the deeper the shadow. And it really applies to a lot of people. Like the more, you know, kind of you work towards enlightenment, the more you have to actually face the darkness. And the more you have to go through life difficulty. Like nothing feels nothing if you never seen the opposite. And
That's right.
And this is like why all this positive psychology is bullshit in my mind.
Yeah.
That you should just be happy all the time.
To risk something, because I can't claim it as a realization, but it's a strong suspicion that, you know, from the Buddhist point of view, that, you know, suffering is unavoidable. It could be, call it suffering or call it stress. Or, I mean, we would say stress these days, that it perhaps is unavoidable because it's the biggest blessing that exists, that we're motivated for growth, for change, that if we're just stuck where we are and there is no destabilization that comes along, we could stay stuck forever. So maybe, you know, I won't risk it any further because, you know, it's a profound thought to, I won't say welcome it, but to at least respect it for what it is. I mean, you know, Teemu, thank you, because, you know, the drift of this conversation is really meaningful, and I'm very grateful to be a part of it with you and Christian and Dio sitting here. Thank you, and everybody else out there in the great big globe of Earth. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a question: who am I talking with? So some people are joining just in the middle. So Garnet Dupuis is the older gentleman, and Christian Barmen is the younger gentleman, and so Christian is
handsome.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. So
okay, all right, we're both good looking. So
Garnet is at least 5,000 years old, and I'm probably 13 or something like this. So Christian is working on the FlexBeam technology, which I have had a lot of success with in terms of like bringing back coherence physically, like in an area which has been destabilized, like and it's producing pain signals. So it's a great device, very useful. I use it every day. There's very few biohacking devices I use every day, but this is definitely one of those things. And and here we have the NeuroVIZR device, which is the direct access to the first language of your brain, and it really helps you to basically have a psychedelic experience completely sober, and it's great synergistically with whatever practice you have for inducing divine states. But it's something that really helps with stress. I remember working on Biohacker Summit 2020, and every single day I was using this device, and if I felt unmotivated or stressed or overwhelmed, I would go into a NeuroVIZR session, and I come back and I'm like in the zone. I'm in the zone. I could use like a nootropic or a cup of coffee, but none of it works as effectively as this thing for some reason. So or consistently, I would say. So it was very consistent. So these are great tools, and we are talking about new light technologies and their application for health and well-being, and we're just beginning to learn what is possible with these light delics.
Light delics.
If I come up with a word, light delics. So electroceuticals. You have electroceuticals, then you have like
electroceuticals is a word, yes.
Yeah, and these are maybe photoceuticals, I guess.
Electrical entheogens.
We need new symbols.
Yeah, I'm scared to think of what it would sound like in Finnish, which I think is a made up. I don't think you guys actually talk like that. You just do that when you're around people that aren't from Finland to like screw us up. I know it's not a language. You're screwing with us, all right?
Yeah, Finnish language.
Okay, Teemu, I have an idea. An idea. Let's do more of this again some other time. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are definitely coming to the end of this session, and I would love to dive deeper on our channel into what you, Garnet, have to share, as well as Christian, on these technologies. But if you are interested in getting one of these or one of these, go to Biohacker Center.com and look for NeuroVIZR, look for FlexBeam, and we ship globally, internationally. So just get your device there, and we're happy to serve you with these amazing new devices that have been very beneficial to my own performance, health, and well-being so far.
Okay.
And if you like this session, please share in the comments. With that, any last words, gents?
You're a generous and gracious host. Teemu, thank you very much for initiating this and putting it all together. Both Christian and I know, really appreciate and respect what you're doing. And, I'm involved with Christian with his FlexBeam. He's principally involved with me with the NeuroVIZR. So you kind of get 2 for 1 on this deal.
Yeah, thank you very much, Teemu. And of course, we have followed you in your biohacker success as well. So thank you for thinking about us and doing this.
Yeah, as soon as airplanes start to be friendly again, here in Thailand, we have a lot of good stuff to offer you other than our technologies, Hospitality Plus, and, when you're up to your buttocks in snow, it's pretty nice down here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been to Chiang Mai and the northern part of Thailand. I think it's one of the absolutely most beautiful areas to be in that region. Now, this conversation gave me a lot of food for thought for my next book that I'm working with Dr. Olli Sovijärvi. It's called The Resilient Being. And it's now available for pre-order. And in The Resilient Being, we go into resilience, how you build resilience from the level of a single cell up to the whole organism. And we are basically looking at resilience in terms of physical, mental, social, spiritual, and you could say also contextual or environmental resilience. And you are not disconnected from your environment. Garnet may have said that there is no outside or inside, those are all kind of reflections of each other. But in the end, by changing your environment, you can change yourself. By changing your internal environment, everything outside of you changes. And it doesn't happen easily. It's often an iterative process of going through, your deepest shadows. And often what I've seen is that people are actually on the way of their own progress. So if you are struggling with performance and health and well-being, often you should look into the mirror and ask yourself, what am I doing and why I'm doing it? And often like something can be discovered there. And surprisingly often it's related to family lineage, your parents, your childhood, generational things. And there's many things that you are amplifying, and you can choose what you take with you. And you have, in every single moment, you have the opportunity to influence even epigenetic change on what kind of code or information you're passing down to your children and your offspring. And the Resilient Being book is a huge work we're working on right now. It's already like 1,000 pages, like over 4,000
Sounds
references.
About right.
It's getting out of hand. It's too big topic, but it's important. And if you're interested to pre-order it, please do, and support our work at BiohackerCenter.com.
Okay, it's a deal.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you very much for your presence, and I'm looking forward for our next conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can't wait, man.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Be well.
From Thailand, everybody.
Sawadee-krap.
Sawadee-krap.